Vulkan's origins begin amidst the hellish landscape of Nocturne, a planet defined by its tumultuous volcanic environments and harsh, ever-changing geography. Nocturne was a world of fire and death, its surface frequently torn apart by violent eruptions, shifting tectonic plates, and massive reptilian predators. It was here, in this hostile environment, that the infant Vulkan landed, carried across the galaxy like his fellow Primarchs by the will of the Chaos Gods. Discovered by a blacksmith named Nabel in the small town of Hesiod, the child was named Vulkan, after a legendary king of the ancient Nocturnian myths. Under Nabel's care, the young Primarch grew at a prodigious rate, both in physical stature and intellect. By the time he was a mere 3 years old, he towered over full-grown men and had already surpassed the greatest craftsmen of his adoptive people. His mastery over metalwork, combined with his superhuman strength and keen intelligence, made him a figure of awe and reverence among the people of Nocturne. Vulkan's ascension as a leader came not through his strengths alone, but through his courage and his compassion for his people. During his 4th year on Nocturne, the town of Hesiod was assaulted by a raiding force of Dark Eldar slavers. The people, accustomed to hiding from these marauders, began to seek shelter in their well-practiced hiding places. But Vulkan, refusing to cower before the Xenos, took up 2 blacksmith's hammers and stood defiantly in the town square. His presence inspired the townspeople to rally behind him, and together they fought back the Dark Eldar, driving them from their settlement. This victory became a turning point for the people of Nocturne, who united under Vulkan's leadership, swearing never to hide from their enemies again. The Primarch's defiance and strength of will were so inspiring that the 7 major settlements of Nocturne came together, acknowledging Vulkan as their undisputed champion and leader. To celebrate their newfound unity and the courage of their hero, the people of Nocturne held a grand tournament, inviting the greatest warriors and craftsmen from all the corners of the planet. During the festivities, a mysterious stranger arrived, a pale-skinned outlander who challenged Vulkan to a series of contests that would test their endurance, strength, and skill. For 8 days, the two competed in grueling trials, each seemingly equal to the other in every regard. In the final contest, a hunt for the largest salamander on Nocturne, Vulkan succeeded in slaying a great beast, but was caught in the eruption of a volcano and left dangling from a cliffside, his prey in hand. It was then that the stranger appeared, sacrificing his own victory to save Vulkan's life. The stranger had captured a greater predator than his. Upon returning to the settlement, Vulkan knelt before the stranger, acknowledging his sacrifice and proclaiming that a man who values life over pride is worthy of his service. At that moment, the stranger revealed himself to be none other than the Emperor of mankind. The Emperor's test had been not just of Vulkan's strength and skill, but of his character and humility. Moved by the Primarch's unwavering dedication to his people and his willingness to kneel before what he deemed greater than himself, the Emperor embraced Vulkan as his son. He explained to Vulkan the nature of his purpose: to lead the 18th Legion of Space Marines, later named the Salamanders, and to serve as a beacon of hope and strength for humanity across the stars. Vulkan swore eternally to serve the Emperor, agreeing to leave Nocturne in the care of his new legion and to join the Great Crusade in order to reunite humanity under the banner of the Imperium of mankind. After his acceptance of the Emperor's offer, Vulkan took command of the 18th Legion, which had been formed from his own genetic code and known until then as the Dragon Warriors. Vulkan's reunion with his legion was marked by tragedy and triumph. The Salamanders were embroiled in a desperate campaign against a massive orc horde near the Taras division, scattered and leaderless after sustaining grievous casualties. Arriving with a fresh wave of recruits from Nocturne, Vulkan immediately took charge, rallying the remnants of his battered legion in launching a daring counterattack. Leading his warriors into the heart of the enemy forces, Vulkan's sheer presence on the battlefield turned the tide, breaking the orc lines and driving the greenskins into disarray. The victory cemented his bond with the legion, and they knelt before him, proclaiming their loyalty. In a gesture of profound humility, Vulkan knelt in return, honoring their sacrifices and vowing to stand with them, not as a distant ruler, but as a brother in arms. With his legion reunited, Vulkan began the arduous task of reshaping them in his own image. He infused the Salamanders with the values of the Promethean Creed, a doctrine that emphasized endurance, sacrifice, and the strength of the community. Each Salamander was thought to be a master craftsman, forging their own weapons and armor as a rite of passage. Vulkan believed that the act of creation linked a warrior to his weapon, turning it into an extension of his will. The Salamanders were organized into 7 companies, each named after one of the major settlements of Nocturne, reflecting their deep connection to their homeworld and its people. Vulkan's influence transformed the Salamanders into not only fierce warriors, but also protectors of the weak, driven by a sense of duty to defend those who could not defend themselves. Throughout the Great Crusade, Vulkan's Salamanders became known for their unwavering resolve and compassion. They took part in numerous campaigns, but their most notable victory came during the compliance of Karatan. There, Vulkan's ideals clashed violently with those of his brother Konrad Curze, the Primarch of the Night Lords, where Curze used terror and brutality to force the population into submission. Vulkan sought to minimize civilian casualties, focusing on breaking the power of the ruling elite rather than punishing the common folk. Their differences culminated in a fierce confrontation, with Vulkan physically restraining Curze from slaughtering the helpless. Though they ultimately succeeded in bringing Karatan into compliance, the incident deepened the rift between the two brothers and set the stage for future conflict. Despite the growing tension among the Primarchs, the Salamanders continued to make significant contributions to the Crusade. They were instrumental in the Siege of Gathalamor, where Vulkan's expertise in siegecraft and fortifications proved crucial in breaking the defenses of Xenos Empire entrenched deep within the planet's surface. Under his guidance, the Salamanders' reputation grew as warriors of unbreakable resolve, but also as the guardians of humanity, who fought not to conquer for glory, but to protect the innocent and preserve the Emperor's ideal. Yet, even as Vulkan led his legion from one victory to the next, the seeds of treachery were already being sown, and a dark betrayal awaited him and his sons on the world of Isvan V. The Horus Heresy, the cataclysmic war that tore the Imperium apart, erupted in full force when Horus, the favorite son of the Emperor, turned against his father. Vulkan, ever loyal, answered the call to arms when the traitorous War Master made his stand on Isvan V. Alongside the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard, the Salamanders were deployed as part of a strike force intended to crush Horus's rebellion in its infancy. But as they made the planet fall, they were met not with victory but betrayal. The Loyalist legions were surrounded and attacked by their supposed allies, the Alpha Legion, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, and Wordbearers. In a devastating ambush, the Loyalists were caught between the hammer of the traitor forces and the anvil of fortified defenses, and what was supposed to be a decisive blow against the traitors became a massacre. The Salamanders, under Vulkan's command, bore the brunt of the assault. The traitors unleashed nuclear fire upon them, vaporizing entire companies in an instant. Despite the overwhelming odds, Vulkan refused to retreat, rallying his sons and leading them in a desperate attempt to break through the encircling forces. His Warhammer, Dawnbringer, shattered traitor lines and smashed through power armor as he cut a path through the battlefield. But the sheer scale of the betrayal was too great. Ferrus Manus, Vulkan's closest ally among the Primarchs, was slain by Fulgrim, and Korax of the Raven Guard was forced to retreat, leaving Vulkan and his sons to face the traitors alone. By the end of the massacre, the Salamanders were shattered, their numbers reduced to a fraction of their former strength. Vulkan himself, though wounded and exhausted, fought on, refusing to abandon his sons. But even his indomitable will could not turn the tide. Surrounded by the Night Lords and Iron Warriors, Vulkan was overwhelmed and captured by his twisted brother, Konrad Curze. The Dropsite Massacre was a dark day for the Imperium, a brutal testament to the treachery of Horus and the shattered unity of the legions. For the Salamanders, it was a near total annihilation, a wound from which they would never fully recover. As Vulkan was dragged from the battlefield, his fate seemed sealed, and the Salamanders were left leaderless, broken, and on the verge of extinction. Yet, despite the horrors of Isvan V, Vulkan's spirit remained unbroken, and his defiance in the face of unimaginable torment would become the stuff of legend. Captured by Konrad Curze, Vulkan's nightmare truly began in the depths of the Night Lord's flagship, the Nightfall. Curze, already teetering on the edge of madness, was obsessed with proving that even the noblest of beings could be broken and twisted. For months, the Night Hunter subjected Vulkan to unimaginable tortures, each death more gruesome and elaborate than the last. The Primarch was beheaded, burned alive, shot at close range with bolters, and even thrown into the void of space. Yet, each time, his perpetual nature brought him back to life, his body regenerating no matter the extent of the damage. Curze grew more and more deranged, frustrated by Vulkan's refusal to yield or break. Seeking to destroy not just his body but his very spirit, Curze used sorcery to trap Vulkan in nightmarish illusions, forcing him to relive the deaths of his sons over and over again. In a final effort to prove that Vulkan was no different from himself, Curze led his brother through a deadly maze constructed by Perturabo, at the center of which lay Dawnbringer, Vulkan's beloved Warhammer, and the mutilated corpses of his own Salamanders. Curze sought to show that Vulkan's strength was meaningless in the face of despair. Yet, Vulkan, even in the depths of torment, refused to submit to hatred or despair. He fought his way through the maze, defeating every trap and ambush Curze set for him. Upon reaching his Warhammer, Vulkan's rage boiled over, and he used the teleporter hidden within Dawnbringer to escape his brother's clutches. Teleported across the galaxy, he fell through the skies of Makraj, home of the Ultramarines, like a blazing comet. The sight of a charred figure plummeting from the heavens stunned the Ultramarines. Initially mistaking his blackened form for a grotesque statue, the apothecaries of Makraj watched in disbelief as his body slowly began to regenerate, muscle and sinew knitting back together before their eyes. Vulkan, however, was a shattered man, his mind broken by Curze's relentless torment. Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was at first furious at the sight of his ravaged brother, demanding to know why he had returned in such a state. The two Primarchs clashed, but it was John Grammaticus, a perpetual working for the enigmatic Cabal, who intervened. Grammaticus, seeing Vulkan's fragmented state, used the psychic artifact known as the Fulgurite to kill Vulkan and restore his sanity. Fully revived, Vulkan knew his place was on Terra. Gathering a small force of his loyalists known as the Draxvard, he set off through the dangerous pathways of the Webway, battling Dark Eldar and demons alike. The journey was fraught with peril, but Vulkan was driven by a single purpose: to stand beside the Emperor during humanity's darkest hour. Guided by the Emperor's psychic influence, Vulkan's resolve burned brighter than ever. When he finally emerged from the labyrinth's depths of the Webway, he stood before the gates of the Imperial Palace, a figure of unrelenting fury and strength, ready to take up arms against the traitors who threatened to heart of the Imperium. During the Siege of Terra, Vulkan stood as one of the Emperor's final defenders, stationed at the Eternity Gate to serve as an unbreakable shield against the traitor legions. His presence was hidden from most, for the Emperor had entrusted him with a crucial and dreadful task. When Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons infiltrated the Webway beneath the palace, Vulkan faced his brother in a brutal duel of strength and sorcery. Each time Magnus's spells tore him apart, Vulkan's body would regenerate due to his nature as a perpetual, and he would rise again, his indomitable will unbroken. Despite being battered and weakened, Vulkan's perseverance eventually forced Magnus to retreat, but the battle left him deeply strained. As the siege reached its climax and Horus lowered the void shields of the vengeful spirit, signaling the final confrontation, the Emperor forbade Vulkan from joining him. Instead, Vulkan was ordered to remain behind, guarding the Golden Throne and prepared to activate the Talisman of Seven Hammers, a device powerful enough to destroy Terra if the Emperor failed. However, the Emperor's victory over Horus spared Vulkan this terrible burden, and he was present when the Emperor was placed upon the Golden Throne, sealing his fate as humanity's eternal protector. In the aftermath of the Heresy, Vulkan struggled with the political aftermath and the loss of his brothers. He opposed the breaking of the legions into smaller chapters as prescribed by the Codex Astartes, but ultimately yielded to prevent further conflict. Burdened by the devastation of his legion and the Emperor's confinement to the Golden Throne, Vulkan departed from his sons, leaving behind the promise that he would return in humanity's darkest hour. True to his word, he briefly reappeared over a millennium later during the War of the Beast, when the Imperium was threatened by a massive orc wag, led by the towering war boss known as the Beast. Vulkan single-handedly defended the world of Caldera, battling countless orcs, and even sacrificing himself repeatedly to stall the invasion. Ultimately, he assisted the Imperium in defeating the Beast, but after the war's end, Vulkan vanished once more. His disappearance left the Salamanders with the task of gathering the 9 sacred artifacts he had scattered across the galaxy, believing that their reunion would herald their Primarch return when the Imperium faces its greatest peril. Thus, Vulkan's legacy endures, his teachings and indomitable spirit continuing to guide his sons as they await his prophesied return.